Ladies and gentlemen, fight fans all around the world, from the sunny Caribbean, you're watching What You Need. I want to look into more detail at Lineal Championships. Now, I already told you, I go by the Ring magazine to look at lineal champions in the world. But the Ring magazine did not follow lineal championships all the time from 1922 to the present time. They observed also lineal championships pre-1922, all the way back into the 1800s. But the problem with it is that the Ring magazine, they didn't follow lineal championships for a certain period of time, and that would be between the late 1980s and the early 2000s. So what we need to do is we need to fill in those gaps. And when you fill in the gaps, there are certain discrepancies that are involved. Now remember, a lineal champion, the whole idea of lineal champion in this present time was simply not only to chart the course of who beat who to become champion, it's there to show who the true champion of a division is. And generally speaking, you want to know, in an era where there are multiple titles given by multiple sanctioning bodies, who's the guy that stands out, who is the man in that division, who's the person that really is the true champion, who's the guy that can beat everybody in that division, basically. So that's why lineal championships came about. Now bear that in mind, because the last video that I did with you guys, you would realize that sometimes guys get the title of lineal champion, but they're not necessarily the true divisional champion in that division, or it's not yet resolved. We still don't know who the guy is, who's the true champion in that division. So let's get that thought process deep into our minds as we go into some more detail on lineal championships. Now, when we look at the Ring magazine, as I said before, it didn't cover lineal championships from the late 1980s to the early 2000s. And here in Wikipedia, they cover a particular incident. Now, a guy called Cliff Rod of Boxing Scene, he was speaking about the last lineal champion of the light heavyweight division, who was Michael Spinks, who went up to heavyweight and won the heavyweight championship in 1985. And so since that time, there has been a vacancy of the lineal championships. Now, let me just go into that in more detail so that you guys can see what I'm talking about. So if we go here to the Ring magazine's annual ratings, I always go with the Ring for their ratings. I find their ratings very, very good. You can see what he's talking about. In 1985, Michael Spinks was the heavyweight champion of the world, and he was the lineal champion because he beat the man that would be Larry Holmes to become the heavyweight champion of the world. But just the year before that, in 1984, he was actually the lineal light heavyweight champion of the world. Now, after he vacated that position and became the lineal heavyweight champion of the world, there was a vacancy. And if you look in 1985, Marvin Johnson was the #1 ranked light heavyweight in the world. But what happened was, in 1985, Marvin Johnson did not fight the #2 guy, nor the #3 guy. You know, he fought somebody who was ranked a lot lower. And remember, if a lineal champion vacates his title, it's supposed to be the top 2 guys who would fight each other. And if they don't fight each other, if they agree not to fight each other, maybe they're brothers or whatever, then it is the next ranked in line. Okay? So that didn't happen. And so that vacancy was so for a period of time until 1996. In 1996, the top 2 contenders in the light heavyweight division, Henry Mask and Virgil Hill, fought one another, and Virgil Hill came out triumphant, beating Henry Mask to become the lineal light heavyweight champion of the world. Not only that, but the unified lineal light heavyweight champion of the world. So there was no doubt in anyone's mind that he was the lineal champion because he had 2 of the possible 3 at that time sanctioning belts. The only one he was missing was the WBC light heavyweight title to become the undisputed champion, and therefore no doubt in anyone's mind that he was the man in the division. Now, what's interesting about that is at that same time, Roy Jones Jr. was the #1 ranked super middleweight in the world. And remember, the ring at that time wasn't speaking of lineal champions. He was the man at super middleweight. And Roy Jones Jr., what he did just the day before, he fought the #6 ranked light heavyweight in the world, which was Mike McCallum at the time. Okay? And he managed to beat him. But Virgil Hill was the lineal champion at the time. Now here's a couple of more interesting things. Even though Virgil Hill beat Henry Mass, he tried to unify with a gentleman known as Darius Michalczewski, who was from Germany. And he was trying to unify the WBO title with the IBF and WBA titles, but he lost to Darius Michalczewski. In doing so, Michalczewski became the lineal champion. And if you look at Michalczewski's record in 1997, after he beat Virgil Hill, he had now a unified WBA, IBF, and WBO titles. He was not called the undisputed champion because at the time, the WBO was not recognized as a title that would give you the undisputed championship. It was the WBC. You needed to have the WBC, WBA, and IBF. However, he was the unified champion. He definitely was the man of the division. However, he was stripped of the other two titles because he did not defend the WBA and IBF, and he went on to continue defending his WBO title. But he was, by lineage, the lineal champion of the division, all the way up into 2003. Why is this important? Because Ring Magazine in the year 2000, rated Roy Jones Jr. as the #1 light heavyweight in the world and Darius Michalczewski as the #2 light heavyweight in the world. Now here's the interesting thing about that. Roy Jones Jr. in the year 2001 by the Ring Magazine, as they resumed following lineal champions, was dubbed the lineal champion without having faced Darius Michalczewski. So based on that alone, you would ask yourself, why is Roy Jones Jr. the light heavyweight lineal champion? Now remember what we said about lineal champions. Generally, a lineal champion is a true champion of a division, right? So in order to understand this, there are a number of things you need to look at. First of all, let's look at what happened when Roy Jones Jr. he beat Virgil Hill. He was still just a light heavyweight contender in the division, moving up the ranks. But then he went on to face Lou Duval and unify the WBC and WBA titles. Not only that, but a little later on, he unified the WBC, WBA, and IBF world titles with Reggie Johnson to become the undisputed light heavyweight champion of the world. And this was in 1999. And so that pushed his rankings up to the #1 rankings after he had successful defenses in the year 2000 and adding a minor belt to that, the IBO belt. Now, in 2001, he continued to win. In fact, he beat one of the guys that beat the lineal champion later on in 2003, Julio Cesar Gonzalez. He beat him. But the interesting thing about it is this, that he never faced Darius Michalczewski in that period of time. So even though he was considered the lineal champion, he never fought Darius Michalczewski to get that title. But he was the undisputed light heavyweight champion of the world. And herein lies the conundrum. The conundrum is this. Who was the true champion of the division? Sort of like Sergey Kovalev and Adonis Stevenson, except in this case, Roy Jones Jr. was the undisputed light heavyweight champion of the world. If you're the undisputed light heavyweight champion of the world, you should be dubbed the true champion. But he wasn't, through lineage, the man who beat the man who beat the man, the lineal champion of the division. And herein lies the conundrum, because the lineal champion is supposed to denote the true champion. So to solve that problem, just like how you would solve the problem with Sergey Kovalev versus Adonis Stevenson, Roy Jones Jr. should have fought Darius Michalczewski. If he had done that, then he would have once and for all laid to rest the problem about being lineal champion. He never did that. However, I can see how the ring gives grounds for Roy Jones Jr. being the lineal champion, because he was definitely the man of his division. He was the king of his division at the time they dubbed him that. And he went on to be that in 2002, in 2003, and then in 2004 he changed hands. All right, Antonio Tarver, I believe, beat him, as well as Glenn Johnson, and Glenn Johnson became the lineal champion. I'm not too sure if he beat. Well, let's just look and see. So here we have, he lost to Antonio Tarver in 2004, and then Antonio Tarver, I believe, lost to Glenn Johnson that same year, so that Glenn Johnson became the lineal champion. Now, what I would like to say is, though I follow what the Ring Magazine did in making Roy Jones Jr. the lineal champion, I understand the credibility of people talking about Virgil Hill being the lineal champion in the period when the ring wasn't recognizing lineal champions, and also the fact that Virgil Hill, becoming lineal champion, was beaten by Darius Michalczewski, and Darius Michalczewski was the lineal champion. So that there are other boxing sites who follow the information from the International Boxing Research Organization and from members there, and they rank fighters a little differently. It still comes back to being the current lineal champion today is still the current lineal champion at the end of the day with all those rankings, but at the same time they follow a different lineage. Okay, they decide to follow the actual lineage. So different people have different opinions. Now, these sites that rate these fighters and rate lineal champions and differ a bit from the ring, they are very recent. Most of them have appeared on the scene in the early 2000s to this period of time. And some of those sites you can go and look at are the Cyber Boxing Zone, the Transnational Boxing Rankings Board, and BoxingScene.com. There are 4-part series on articles done in the BoxingScene.com. Just type in lineal champion, you'll find out all that information. So I hope that this helps out a bit in terms of lineal champions. Like I said, a lineal champion generally is there to distinguish between titleists. Okay? And if you can become undisputed champion, as Roy Jones Jr. did, then you have a great case for being the lineal champion there, even though there may be a lineal champion existing. Okay? But you can always settle it by fighting the lineal champion, beating him, and getting his title. That's another way of doing it. So, yes, I still follow the ring, but I do also keep in the back of my mind that certain organizations and people, especially if you've done the research, the International Boxing Research Organization, which works with the International Boxing Hall of Fame, with different sanctioning bodies, and with the ring, they provide that lineal championship information that you can take and you can judge one way or the other. Some people try to say that the ring's information is false or invalid, but actually the ring is pretty solid in their arguments about who is a lineal champion and who is not, based on the fact that it's about separating the true champion from other champions. You guys have a great one.